In trigonometry, we need to know some basic things about geometry in order to get started. So we're going to start by reviewing a right triangle. So I have here a right triangle with a 90-degree angle and two other angles that I'm going to call alpha and beta. Alpha and beta are Greek letters that stand for A and B in the Greek alphabet. Opposite side or opposite angle alpha, I'm going to call this side A, and opposite angle beta, I'm going to call this side B, and opposite the 90-degree angle, I'm going to call this side C. And you may recall that A and B are called legs of the right triangle, and C is called the hypotenuse, which is the longest side of a right triangle. Some other things you might recall about triangles is that the sum of the three angles in any triangle has to equal 180 degrees. And since one of these angles is 90, then we know that the sum of the other two, alpha plus beta, has to also equal 90 degrees, which means that alpha and beta are called complementary angles. My cursor is, or my pen is not lined up correctly, so I'll just put an arrow here. Those are called complementary angles. You might also recall that if the sum is equal to 100, if two angles have a sum of 180, they're called supplementary angles. The last thing we need to know about, just in general about right triangles here, is that a squared plus b squared equals c squared. The sum of the two legs equals the sum. The sum of the squares of the two legs equals the square of the hypotenuse, and this is known as the Pythagorean theorem, which is a theorem that we will be using over and over and over again this year in trigonometry. Next, I want you to recall that a trig value is the ratio of two sides of a right triangle. So let's start with our angle alpha, and I'm going to label the sides the way we had before. When we're talking about angle alpha, the side across from the angle, or opposite the angle, we're going to call this the opposite side, which I will abbreviate OPP. The side next to the right triangle, or the angle that I'm talking about, the side that's not the hypotenuse, the other leg that's adjacent, we call this the adjacent side. It's next to the angle, and I'm going to abbreviate that ADJ. And then, of course, this is the hypotenuse, which I will abbreviate HYP. Sometimes I'll just abbreviate them A, O, and H too. Now, we have trig functions that are defined with certain ratios. Cosine of alpha is defined as the adjacent side over the hypotenuse, or A over C. Sine of alpha is defined as the opposite side over the hypotenuse, or, I just said that wrong, cosine is not A over C, it is B over C. Sine is A over C. Tangent of alpha is defined as the opposite over the adjacent side, or A over B. If we looked at angle beta from our previous triangle, and the sides labeled the same way, notice that cosine of beta is going to be A over C, because its opposite side is B, its adjacent side is A, the hypotenuse is still C. So this is now the adjacent side in relation to angle beta, and this is the opposite side in relation to angle beta. So cosine of beta is A over C Sine of beta then is opposite, or b over c, and tangent of beta is b over a. So I want you to notice, I'm going to write out these words for you since I'm just using the abbreviation. This is cosine, sine, and tangent. Now there was a little acronym that helped us to remember these ratios, and it comes from the first letter, cosine, adjacent, hypotenuse, sine, opposite, hypotenuse, tangent, opposite over adjacent. And I should have started out with sine because we use sine first. SOH, CAH, TOA, and we call that TOA. So sine, opposite over hypotenuse. So let me get my sine, opposite over hypotenuse, cosine, adjacent over hypotenuse, tangent, opposite over adjacent. You need to know these very well, memorize, down pat, never forget, because once again we'll be using these over and over and over again as we move through this year in pre-calculus trigonometry.